Uh, you all right? I wasn't expecting you to join. Yeah, first person here. I'm a little bit late. Happy birthday to Donald Watson today, which is far more important than International Bacon Day, which I've seen quite a lot of vegans share. Never understand why vegans share that kind of shit. Why would you want to perpetuate something that we absolutely fundamentally oppose? Especially on Donald Watson's birthday. I mean, I don't think that that's an accident that that's potentially International Bacon Day. That's fucking probably rubbing it in his face. Are you both quite quick today?
Hello.
Welcome. Did you guys know International Bacon Day today?
What, me? International Baking Day or bacon?
Bacon Day. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how these things originate, but I've seen that shared more often today that it's International Bacon Day than I have about Watson's birthday.
I mean, yeah, it probably was. I mean, all the people that say bacon probably were taking part
Well,
in it.
I'm talking about in the vegan groups in regards to like have a look at this post and it's like just ignore them. We're perpetuating this stuff by sharing it. It's a
Um,
great opportunity to us to counter it and say, well, it's Donald Watson's birthday today. Do you know who that is? You should probably have a look. It's far more
I,
important than this.
I know. There's kind of like an obsession with kind of looking at what people from the other side are putting and getting all upset about it on Facebook. There's that kind of, that happens loads, and I just think, well, instead of doing that, if you were to focus on like vegan outreach and educating, educating others to go vegan, that's a far better use of your time than constantly focusing on what the anti-vegan people are saying and you know ranting and raving over that. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Hi everyone.
You're right.
Hi, Roger.
Yeah, struggling to get my camera on, but can you see that? But I don't suppose I suppose it's very small for
Hang
everybody,
on.
is it?
Let me see if I can change. I can never remember how to do this. There is a way.
There's always a way.
Which is the button that I need to press? Oh, that one. Guests.
Come on, Rouge. Rouge is in a real bad mood.
Is it,
Yeah.
is it this one?
Uh,
Right, fixed layout. What does that one do?
Come on then.
That's no better. That's not better either. Joe, whilst you've come in, what's the setting how I can make Roger's thing a bit bigger? I'm sure there's one. Or is it this one is the
how
best
you
one?
can make Roger's thing a bit bigger.
Yeah, that don't anyone clip that.
Hang on,
I'm afraid
a minute. If that's true, I wish I'd have known that a
I'm
few
afraid
years
I
ago.
can't advise.
I could have done with this advice about 50 years ago.
Yeah, and me. Too late now.
Oh, what can I say? But yeah, I'm sure there is a way to change the screen layout so that we're all kind of equal sized. But I can never remember how to do any of these things.
Yeah, it's one of those things where with technology, you finally get to know how to do it, and then they go and change it all.
Yeah, that's usually the way. I don't think that's better.
Oh,
Yeah, there
that's
you go.
better.
That's better.
Yay! Look at that.
Hey, that's good.
And can you get rid of that fourth box?
No, sadly not.
All right. And there's a blank, but oh, that's Ronnie, is it?
Yeah, Ronnie is the third one. Yeah, and the fourth one.
Ronnie is blank.
And then there's the invite is for the extra person. Yeah, because I can limit it to 4, but I can't limit it to 3.
Okay. So there's a significance of what you got. I've got another couple that I can put up if I can find them. But I've certainly got two. So this would be the 113th birthday of Donald Watson. Donald Watson is the best known of the co-founders of the vegan social movement, which was founded in 1944. So that means that they founded it during the Second World War. And it's interesting, really, because there is a suggestion that Watson was a bit of a moderate, and even a suggestion that he was kind of like ousted from the society he co-founded, and some kind of militants like Ronnie came in and started booting him out and this kind of stuff. But I mean, we all know that this is not true. And Andy, I mean, you've virtually kind of looked at everything that Watson's ever written, I think.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that the fact that even after, the person who's supposed to have booted him out, after that person died, Watson never said anything bad about him.
No, nor after he booted him out either. I mean, don't forget, Watson was more than, I think this is a really key point. So for the first 18 months nearly, Watson did all of this. I know there was other people involved, but he did all of the vegan magazine, or the vegan news as it was then, by himself, in terms of writing, printing, stapling, posting, everything. So do you not think, seriously, if let's just look at this logically and put no vegan bias to it at all, that if a few years later Donald Watson was then kicked out of his own organisation by Leslie Cross and others, that he couldn't have started, say, the real vegan news? Here's the truth about how I was kicked out of my own group. Yeah, I think he was definitely capable of doing that, and he never did anything in that regard. If anything, all he ever did was show the utmost respect for these people, even after they died. In fact, one of the last interviews he ever did literally says, I don't like naming names, but it would be wrong of me to not credit Leslie Cross for his efforts. So, why would you say that? Why would you do any of those things? And I really think that it just shows a lack of respect for Donald as an individual to think that he wouldn't have stood up for something that he clearly cared about for all of his life, more or less.
Well, it's just being used by people who want veganism to be just a diet, and they're kind of what they're saying is that Donald Watson wanted veganism to be just a diet, and then Leslie Cross muscled in and threw him out and turned it into a philosophy of animal liberation. Yeah. But this quote here, from just this one quote here from Donald Watson, gives the lie to that, doesn't it?
And that quote is from before Leslie Cross is essentially anything to do with the society. He's still writing that as himself. That's a response to someone asking him a question. So all of that's Donald Watson. There's no interference at that point. Even if you wanted to argue that some of the stuff that he said in the 60s or the 70s could have been influenced, that definitely wasn't.
Not at all, you see. So it's a completely false construct, isn't it? It's just people trying to, bend history to suit their own ends, really, isn't it?
I can understand to some degree. I don't actually know the guy's name to name him, but the guy from the Vegan Society.today sort of thing, he's got a financial incentive in promoting veganism as a diet because he sells supplements and health foods. So he's got an incentive to promote that idea. But a lot of the other people, they've got no financial incentive. They're just ignorant, really. It just suits some other narrative that they've got.
Do you know, I think one of the interesting things is that the fact that a lot of people kind of, in this kind of construction of the history of the vegan movement, they have kind of Watson described as a moderate compared with others. But the thing is, for his time, Donald Watson was really radical. Essentially, they kind of declared peace during the Second World War, which is pretty bloody radical in the first place. But
do you not think being a conscientious objector was pretty radical?
So he was a conscientious objector, which I don't even think Cross was that.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I've never been able to. I mean, I can make the assumption that he was, but I've never been able to find any evidence that backs that up. Where there's plenty about Donald Watson, even the lengths and how long that he potentially suffered and knocked down wage and knocked down rations and how he had to squamp and save, basically. Yeah, that's all there.
Yeah, I think part of the argument, which seems to support that narrative of him being thrown out and everything, was the fact that they say, well, because Watson wanted veganism to be a diet and also about health and stuff. And I think that the reason that they say that is a misunderstanding about why Watson actually did talk about diet and health at the beginning, and I think that's because they had to,
Of course.
in the sense that they, I mean, like we all know. Well, I mean, people who know vegan history know that they didn't expect to be running a social movement at all. They actually thought they'd applied, as it were, to be a kind of section of the vegetarian society, right? And the vegetarians said no, and so then they said, okay, we've now they had to kind of start a movement from scratch, and at the same time, all the people in the vegetarian movement was telling them that they were going to die, because it was thought in those days that living without any products derived from other animals was impossible for human beings.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's what they had to first concentrate on. So I think the fact that they had to concentrate on that, and as you said, Andy, he was rather stuck doing everything as well, all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that we need to take into consideration is, I'm more than happy to concede that when this idea was born, it was exclusively food related. And that's what they were thinking. It really probably was down to just those lines. But as you start thinking and expanding the picture and thinking, well, I'm against this. So morality-wise, I also need to be against this. Morality-wise, I also need to be against this. You can read that. There are discussions in the first few issues about whether like honey is vegan or not, because they're not sure about where they stand themselves. And it's kind of like you can watch this evolve. And I mean, look at it all these years later. Look at, like, take me for an example. I came into the movement essentially like many people did, thinking it was about not consuming animal products, not wearing them, and about being kind and not cruel. Essentially what they started off with before they evolved and realized actually this is much bigger than this and this affects a lot of other stuff. Whereas where I'm at now, the only difference is I had the hindsight and the ability to look at this information that's existed for 80 plus years, and Donald Watson didn't. He didn't have a book that he can read. He didn't have a website that he can type in and read this information and get it all in one moment. He had to learn.
Yeah, it's amazing to trace their kind of journey, isn't it? I mean,
when you actually look at it, especially, I mean, I've mentioned this point a couple of times, but like the emphasis on the time as well. We're not talking about like when it's hard for us to think about this now because we have the news that's on like 3 or 4 times a day, or like if you like a magazine or something, it usually comes out fairly regularly, weekly, fortnightly, monthly. These are coming out like 4 times a year, and each time we're talking about quite a lot that's changed within a 3-month period each time. And like they've had a lot of time to sit back and think, you know, when we wrote that, we can't say that again, or we need to amend that, or we need to change it. And there are corrections from things that they say we'd like to correct something from whatever spring issue of this year. So they do learn things as they go, but there's so much time there. It's not like someone is thinking, oh crap, I've got an answer and I've got to hit send like it is now on social media. They've got a lot of time to think about what they want to say and how to structure it. So like and I would have known none of this information without going back and reading it. And I've got it to read. So how Donald or Leslie or anyone else is thinking was working at that time. It's amazing, really, when you think that all of this is going on. It's not just the idea of I'm opposed to this. It's research into how you can be most effectively opposed to this. Yeah, that's incredible as far as I'm concerned, because people don't want to make that effort now when it's a piece of piss.
Yeah, well, even if you go back further than the birth of the vegan movement, if you think about like all the stuff in the Vegetarian Messenger, so there's all these debates about what does vegetarian mean even, and then you end up, well, what's the score about dairy, what's the score about eggs and this kind of stuff, and then you had this interesting concept that arose, which was kind of like a non-dairy vegetarian, right? And that became a kind of thing that they thought that they could try and kind of just shift the paradigm a little bit. So some historians say that phrase actually means that they were dietary vegans.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just non-dairy vegetarianism, but that was a phrase that was used for many years, right? There's a group of non-dairy vegetarians, but I think right at the start, even by looking at the process, it was going to go further than that. It was going to kind of expand from that, because it's almost like they were let off the kind of moral leash, I think. And they thought, wow, actually, this is a big idea, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely, and you can definitely see that as time goes on. Yeah, and like it doesn't take many years at all, but you can see that idea developing, which is why if you've glanced at a couple of issues, or even if you've never read any, just from the bits that you've heard, or maybe what you've got off Wikipedia, I can half understand why you can buy the notion that Donald Watson had one idea and Leslie Cross was this radical guy that came in and kind of pushed him out. But when you actually read the issues and realise that this isn't just Donald Watson anymore, there's Faye and George Henderson who are literally as an inaugural part as he is, who also don't take this sabbatical, by the way, when Leslie Cross apparently kicks everyone out, doesn't kick them out. In fact, George Henderson is the chairman for a little bit. So I don't know how any of this factors in. But if you read the issues one after another in chronological order, you watch them learn through every single issue. So it's not like Leslie Cross came in and said, this is what's going to happen, because they were already talking about it. They were already discussing it. It's just that every single time, it's almost like every issue that goes
yeah,
by.
and because they didn't write in kind of sound bites, he actually said things like, "Well, this is my idea. What do you think?" Really, that's what he was saying, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly that. You got to remember too that a lot of the time these people weren't just. It's not like they'd had something that had been decided. They were putting it to the group. They were. This has been submitted. What does everybody think? It's not. This is how it is.
No,
Because, like I said, they wouldn't correct things otherwise, and there are a number of corrections.
Yeah, but Andy, I think the kind of slowness of it needs to be emphasized in the sense that it was exactly what you were saying. I mean, they were doing this by letter and by a publication that came out 4 times a year and this kind of stuff. I mean, Ronnie will remember that, we all used to get all the magazines and everything to keep up to date, but they only came out 4 times a year.
Exactly.
Everything was much slower then in that sense.
Yeah. And same with the research that goes involved into these articles. It's like I said, it's not like you can just go, right, Wikipedia, I want to find out this. Half of it wouldn't have even been in the library, especially at the time when the society was being founded, because half of the world's literature was on fire. Like, it's not like, think of all the places in France, Austria, Germany that were now rubble. So all of this information that they'd want to go and collect, there wasn't someone that had a big database for them that said, oh, yeah, you want it? Here you go. Here's the folder. No. This was like groundbreaking research that, one, probably nobody had done for some parts before in some aspects, but two, was really difficult to find too. Like the lengths that they would have had to go to, and you can read that in the issues as well. They'll come across a book that they've never heard of before, and they'll put a request out if anyone's got a copy, or can anyone find a copy, or can anyone get in touch with the author, because there's a willingness to learn all the time. Yeah. And we don't have that same willingness now. I've noticed that massively. We don't have that same willingness. I mean, you go back to when you were like really young and you were a kid. When you couldn't say a word properly and someone corrected you, you didn't feel like victimized. You didn't feel personally attacked. Whereas these days, if you say, do you know what, I'd make this correction to your language, everyone goes mental about it. There's an issue all of a sudden as though you've personally attacked them, you've personally offended them, and they're like, but it's no different. It's no different. If you're making a mistake and someone corrects you, there's nothing wrong with that. That should be seen as a positive thing. Thank you. You've improved how I communicate. But it's not seen like that. It's seen as like, oh, how dare you point this out? And that's massively reflective of the movement. Whereas when you look back, no, they were always willing to learn. They were always willing to be corrected and correct one another. The idea of there being like this big division where one person bosses everyone about is laughable when you actually read the issues and realise that sometimes they don't even agree with one another within the same issue.
Well, that sounds like the modern day movement.
It shows it, yeah. There's no hierarchy or whatever. It just doesn't work like that. The only thing that you can say really that's been kind of, I suppose it's society more than anything else, is the fact that the women, and there's a lot of them, especially in the early issues, well, actually all the way through, have not ever been given the recognition or the attention that they deserve, because there's so many of them that wrote so many sort of relevant and important things, and most people don't know they existed. I didn't know they existed, and that's a travesty.
Yeah, are you still there, Ronnie?
Well, I was just not in a nasty way. Still here. Yes. It's all very interesting stuff, and it's just a pity that modern vegans don't know enough about this, and I think well, both of you are doing a great job of sort of bringing this stuff to light.
Well,
And actually,
we have I mean, that's a great point. You got to look at
yeah,
why don't I mean, there's obviously some of it is a lack of interest in the fact that a lot of people consider anything before 6 months ago old, dated, and not relevant anymore. But there's also whose responsibility is it to keep this alive? The vegan societies, right? And they don't do that, I'm afraid. I mean, today should be a really big day for them. There should be stuff all over the place. I haven't seen anything. I signed up for their newsletter. I haven't had a newsletter saying happy birthday, Donald. Like, I mean, this is basic stuff, real simple stuff. And if they can't keep their own history alive, then
Actually, that's a really interesting and important point.
yeah, I mean, all of this comes from the top, right? It does. It's kind of like if the people at the top or the people controlling the society or running the society or who speak for the society don't show any care or interest or respect for their history, then why on earth would anyone else?
Well, the last video I saw featuring the Vegan Society, the head of communication got the definition wrong. So
yeah, exactly. So again, if you don't take the care and attention to get stuff right, how can we criticize other people for not taking the time and attention to get it right? That's the problem. It's very sad that this is the case that we're in, but also the people. I mean, what else are they really doing if they're not keeping their own history alive?
But do you think it's part of what we talked about already, which is the kind of the slowness of then and the quickness of now? It's kind of almost like we don't have time to think now.
True, I can concede that to some degree, but at the same time, I suppose just something as simple as Donald's birthday, same day every year. So it should be almost like you've already got a header and a template email ready to go, that kind of thing. It's pretty simple stuff. There's not loads of new information to find, but it'd be nice for you to just acknowledge it and put it out there and remind everyone that we wouldn't be calling ourselves vegans potentially if it wasn't for this man. So, it'd be nice if you knew who he was. Because like I said, if no one else is going to do it, they can't really be annoyed if anyone forgets. They can't be bothered. Because they should be setting the standard, and I don't feel like they do.
Well,
it seems like they're quite happy for all of this stuff to be forgotten. I mean, why aren't they doing what I'm doing? Why aren't the people that are in charge now of the society rereading these issues and going, hang on a minute, there's loads of people here that have never been given any proper attention. Let's give it to them.
Yeah, I think the kind of, if you try to situate the vegan society within the movement, it's quite a tricky position, and Ronnie will know this as well, in the sense that we didn't really regard the vegan society as kind of part of the movement in the 80s. I mean, Compassion in World Farming was, but not the vegan society.
And they weren't seen as a campaigning group.
That was the defining thing. If you weren't campaigning, you didn't kind of exist,
Yeah, and they weren't. I mean, they did campaign to some extent. I mean, some of them went around giving talks, but they didn't campaign in the same way that that other organisations did. Like Compassion in World Farming and the anti-vivisection organisations, the League Against Cruel Sports, and all that. They're campaigning. They were much more upfront with their campaigning, whereas the Vegan Society weren't. It was mainly like it was somewhere where you went for information about veganism, really. If you wanted to go vegan, they'd give you information and support, but they didn't really seem to be going out to educate people to go vegan, only to a very, very small extent.
Yeah, but Ronnie, do you remember, for example, if people joined the SABs and everything, the SABs wouldn't kind of direct people towards the Vegan Society, would they?
No, well, this was the thing, that there wasn't. Kind of what happened was there was a kind of rise in veganism at the same time as a rise in activism. I think what kind of a major feature really of the 70s, which made a big difference in both areas, was the open door programs.
Yeah.
And that was instead of, I think it was it BBC Two Open Door?
Yeah, I think it was BBC Two, and they both featured in the Hunt Saboteurs and also the Vegan Society. Yeah,
they both featured, and basically Open Door was where the TV company lent their sort of technicians and equipment to a group, and the group would kind of make a
Yeah, all their modern production standards.
the group would make a kind of documentary about themselves, and there was one about the Hunt Sabs, there was one about the Vegan Society, and both were highly. I mean, unfortunately, the Vegan Society one is available on YouTube.
Hey, Ronnie, just let me butt in here because we all take the piss out of the vegan one, but was the Hunt Saboteurs one just as bad?
I really don't know, because it's just a shame that it appears to have been lost. It's certainly not on YouTube. Whether anyone in the Sabs.
Well, one of the this brings me on, because I've got a couple of questions. I'll go back to the other questions I was going to ask Ronnie. But so the Animals film, know, like the footage of like some of the Sabs in that and the Nar, is that not possibly from something like that?
Well, I know. I think that was footage that was.
I think that might have been news footage, maybe.
Okay.
And I think there was some that was recorded specifically for the Animals film.
Because I'm guessing. I mean, the Open Door thing. It seems like you get the freedom. It seemed like that anyway, to film your own program, so to speak. So I didn't imagine the Sabs one would be as cheesy as the Vegan Society one.
No, I think the Sabs one features quite a lot of activism out in the field.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought, to be honest. Because they seem to get quite a bit of freedom to record what they want, so I'd imagine it would be a lot of Sab activity.
It was very much a lot of it. I recall was filmed in an outdoor setting, rather than the Vegan Society, which was like almost all indoors, wasn't it?
But that's what I wanted to ask you. So like when you went to that garden party, and for example, like the letter from you that I sent you the screenshot of before, where Kathleen Janaway gives you quite a nice write-up. Like, did you at the time, were you honoured by those things, or was the Vegan Society just kind of like by the by?
Oh no, I did feel kind of honoured, and I think that the reason I was invited was because there were kind of so few vegans. I mean, when I got in touch with them, I got in touch with them for kind of for information initially, and then for some reason I got in touch with them again, or they may have contacted me. I can't remember which way round it was, and that they actually invited me to a garden party down in Surrey, and. It kind of was an honour, because I thought, hey, they were inviting me to this garden party where there was all the kind of sort of leading lights in the Vegan Society were actually there, and why I'm not really sure why I particularly was invited, unless they kind of invited every vegan in the country, and because there was so few at the time, that they weren't worried about it being overcrowded, perhaps. I kind of don't know. But kind of what happened, and I went to another of their events and gave a talk about the Hunt Sabs as well. So I went to a couple of their kind of functions that they'd organised, where they'd put on food and stuff like that. And but I mean, going back to the Open Door programs, that both of those those films recruited loads of people, both to the Hunt Sabs and to the Vegan Society. So there was a big increase in membership in kind of both of those organisations, and so to some extent, I think there was a kind of crossover. So what happened was in the kind of activist groups, like particularly in the Sabs, but I think it was kind of also in some of the kind of anti-vivisection campaigns. That some of the people involved in those campaigns were vegan, and they'd be like new vegans, people that had newly become vegan, and then as other people joined, the vegans that were already involved in those campaigns kind of converted the new people that joined, and so the activist groups became a kind of a place where people turn vegan. And it's certainly the case when I was involved in Hunt Sabs, and we had a group in North London. Almost everyone that joined our group became vegan, probably within a few weeks.
Yeah,
because the people running the group were vegan.
Yeah, that crossover thing. I mean, I know Andy's got some more questions, but just this one to you, Ronnie. I mean, because you were kind of involved with the BUAV in terms of like in their office type of thing, much more than I was. I mean, I just came down once a month because I was on the committee and all that. Whereas you like day-to-day thing. Were most people employed and involved in the BUAV vegans? I think they're pretty well, aren't they?
Yeah, I can't think of anyone at the time. Because what happened was there was
What about Janet?
Sorry, who was
Janet, the receptionist.
Yeah, she was vegan.
Oh, right. Okay.
She went vegan. I think she had been vegetarian and she went vegan. What happened, of course, there was the prior to kind of the late 1970s, I think it was. The BYV had been a pretty traditionalist organisation in terms of the various societies that campaigned against different forms of the oppression of other animals, and they were kind of, and I think most of them weren't even vegetarian. I think one or two of them were vegetarian, and these were people that were kind of referred to as the old guard. The people that had been running the BUAV up to that point. And then there was a campaign. There was an organisation called Compassion, Coordinated Animal Welfare, strangely enough. Quite an odd name for them. And they orchestrated a kind of takeover of the BUAV. That they kind of organised for people who are a lot more radical to be elected to the BUAV committee and kind of sort of stage a coup, stage a takeover of the BUAV, and it was successful. And all those people that were kind of elected to the committee, I can't think of any of them that weren't vegan. And then they, and then the people they employed, they were all vegan as well. I didn't think it was a stipulation that to work at the BUAV you had to be vegan. But it just turned out that everyone working there, like by the kind of late 70s, like everyone working at the BUAV, as far as I know, was vegan. And their committee that ran it, I think all of those were vegan as well. But they didn't promote or campaign for veganism, or include really very much at all about veganism in there.
But no, but they must have recognised it as the potential solution. So they realised that it encompassed a lot more than just food. Clearly.
Yes, I think they. Yes, I'm sure that they did. They were.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, somebody in Ireland says, well, you get on with campaigning for this and that, the other, single issues, and veganism is just something that you do. I think that might have been it.
Yeah, I think what it was that it was kind of, it was sort of felt that, the issue of animals being used for food, that was such a huge area that I think people had this idea of, well, let's kind of deal with the smaller areas first and get rid of them, and then we'll tackle the big one. I think there was kind of that.
Yeah, I was always told when I came into the movement in 1979, I was told, well, we're going to go for circuses and we're going to go for fur and we're going to go for hunting. These are kind of like take the bricks out of the wall type thing.
Yeah, that was kind of very much the thinking, and of course, experiments on animals were that wasn't a kind of small area. I mean, at the time, we kind of go back to the mid 70s. I mean, number of experiments on animals in the UK was well over 6 million.
Yeah, minuscule compared with those eaten, though, Ronnie.
Minuscule compared with those eaten, but also kind of very large compared with, say, the number of animals in circus.
I think actually, like
animals with the numbers.
Yeah, my own thoughts about.
A big thing to tackle, but very much smaller, obviously, than the food industry. And I think that a lot of the reason why kind of.
So going back to even then though, like say the circus, was that abolishment or was that better treatment?
No, it was no. People were campaigning for circuses with no animals.
Right. Okay.
It was totally against the use of animals in circuses, particularly animals that were kind of regarded as wild animals.
But I was going to ask you that then, Ronnie. You see, how can abolish animal circuses ended up being take the the exotic so-called wild animals?
That's what I'm saying. If it was abolishment then, how did it become welfareized basically and reduced to the idea of, well, as long as the elephants aren't in chains?
Well, I think I kind of
I don't know anybody campaigning for that though, Andy.
I don't think
No,
it
no,
ever
but you know what I'm
became.
saying? I mean, that's a pretty extreme example, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean? When did this go from being like, no, we want the end of this, to like, well, yeah, okay, that's a compromise we're willing to accept?
I don't think with circuses it ever did that. To be honest, I think
No, I
I've
don't know.
never known of someone say we want elephants in. You know,
But it is true, Ronnie, that kind of like we were campaigning to end animal circuses, and then suddenly this kind of exotic side of it came in, and maybe it's because they thought that if they could bracket off certain other animals, they could create a win or something.
I think at
I'm
the
not actually
time.
quite sure of that.
Yeah, I think at the time, you see, now you get circus. There are very few so-called wild animals in circuses in the UK now. I think it's a tiny number.
Yeah,
You know,
but I mean that's a good point that Roger's just made though, because the
yeah,
one, I mean, I'm not sure it's definitely still going in 2023, but it was definitely going a couple of years ago. Their main attraction is a fox riding on the back of a horse. So that would tick the two. Well, they're not exotic. They've not been taken from any other country.
yeah,
Worries.
yeah. But you know, like the fox would be regarded as a wild, you know, and the horse as not. But I think you see, going way back, that sort of percentages were very different. Like the number of animals that would be regarded as wild animals in circuses when you go back to the 70s was very large. You
Yeah.
see, it was, you know, so that kind of, when you look at the totality of
Yeah,
numbers of
like
animals in
elephants and
circuses,
tigers and
they had loads and loads of those. You see, so that tended to be, you know, the circuses. When you thought about performing animals in circuses, it was like, it was invariably animals that were considered to be like wild animals. You know, like the you know, the lion tamers and the zebras and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
uh, monkeys, and also they had menageries. You see, they had zoos. Well, what it was, that as well as actually going in the circus and seeing these animals perform,
You
you
could
could
go and see them when they weren't
you
performing.
see them behind. You could see them behind bars in the
Yeah. There's a photo of my dad when he's a youngster
which
stood
was
in front
like,
of a cage, basically.
and
It's got two gorillas in it. Yeah,
and
exactly that.
conditions in those places would be, you know, actually even worse
I
than
wonder,
zoos.
when potentially I think it was live animals being used in circuses was kind of brought into the legislation. I wonder if they were all compensated like they were with the fur ban.
Well, you see, I think a lot of them, a lot of them kind of, um, I think a lot of them either went out of existence or no longer had performing animals, or certainly performing animals considered
I
to
suppose
be
it depends how
right.
big a part of your act it was. Yeah, I mean, if you've got
Yeah, that,
other
I,
acts, you can kind
I,
of, yeah.
I think what happened. I think I think a, you know, considerable part of it was like public opinion, and there were some exposés, you know, some big media exposés of the treatment of the animals in circuses.
well,
That
it's
kind
more
of,
to do with the fact that I think people got to know about the training methods and stuff.
yes, yeah,
Because I read a book about somebody who was in the circus business, Yves something, and I can't remember the last name, but he talked about how they go through stages about kind of taming, training, rehearsal, and then public performance, and the public only see the last bit,
Yeah.
and
yes.
the first three bits are pretty kind of brutal.
Yeah, and I think people became more aware of that, and so I think a lot of circuses, for their own survival, dropped the performing animals.
Well, they had to adjust, didn't they? Because I mean, they used to be on the
Yeah,
telly, didn't they, Ronnie?
they were on the telly. Yeah, I mean, there used to be the circuses. You see a lot of it's to do with um, people having alternative forms of entertainment. Because at one time, you know, when the circus came to town, that was like a huge thing, because people had so few alternatives for where they would go, and it's like the fun fair was a huge thing.
Yeah, fun
But
fair.
that follows the history of the circus, though. I mean, it was deployed in the original Insanity from the same idea as like the Colosseum. you distract people by entertaining them with stuff, and those that are too poor to buy a ticket, the circus was them getting to see it. It was that coming, not just the fact they had to travel to London or somewhere. It came to their town. You brought the
Yes.
Colosseum to their town. That's always been the popularity of the
Yeah.
circus.
Yeah, brought
Anybody
the
can go.
circuses to your town. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right, and it's kind of and it's affected other industries as well. I mean, for instance, one industry that kind of trend has had a big effect on is greyhound racing because um, there are so many alternatives for people to go to for entertainment rather than go and watch dogs run around the track. So that's one of the reasons uh, there's a number of reasons why the dog racing industry has declined, but that's one of them
yeah.
because there's so many alternatives to forms of
Well, yeah,
entertainment.
and I mean, a big part of it too, I suppose, is a lot of those people, and I don't mean to stereotype, but let's just say the typical old man with his paper in his back pocket doesn't actually give a shit about watching the dogs run around the track anyway. And as soon as they started basically saying you can do this online from your phone,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
can bet, and you can still have all the rewards that you wanted, they don't need to watch their race anyway. They just get the result pop up.
Well, and also there's so many other forms of gambling. At one time, the only
Yeah,
real forms of gambling were on the horses and on the dogs, and now you
that's
can
true.
gamble on anything, and you can get all these things on your. I mean, it's a huge problem, I think, in society when quite often you know the telly be on the late night TV, and it's full of ads for gambling apps,
Yeah, yeah.
gambling, and it's just like
Well, I mean, I don't. We don't have telly, and I've got YouTube Premium. But sometimes when we go to mum and dad's house, I notice, especially like if a football match is on, it's loads and loads of gambling adverts, right? But like,
yeah,
normally in amongst these adverts, they'll have one going, "Make sure you take it easy." Gambling's a really addictive thing. Well, stop advertising it then. Like,
gamble.
have some awareness.
What's it? Ray Winston does one where he's walking around. He's advertising Bet625 or something, and he's saying, "Yeah, you can bet on this," and at the end goes, "And remember, gamble responsibly." And
Yeah,
that's what he says at the end
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
they've got to put that. Yeah, they've
Yeah,
got to put that.
Wow, it was
We've
just like he was in
encouraged
the
you to
room there,
become
Ronnie.
gamblers,
yeah.
so we put
That'll stop people abusing it,
that's
won't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge problem. I would ban all those adverts. Totally fucking ban them. It's just disgraceful, and it's such a problem. It's such a gambling addiction is just a huge problem, and that just makes it worse.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
not enough people ask the question of like, so advertising and marketing in this day and age is a very, very expensive industry. And everybody knows that you can bet. It's the same with like McDonald's. Everybody knows that McDonald's exists, but they still spend millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds a month advertising it everywhere all the time because it's not about you. That knowing they exist isn't enough. Unless you're spending your money there, they're not happy. It's like literally rammed. I mean, people talk about like us ramming this information down their throat, but like their entire life is adverts and marketing that's
yeah,
rammed down their throat.
everyone, you know, everyone's got. I mean, we're we're up against huge advertising campaigns from the meat and dairy industry and the egg industry. Those people are being kind of brainwashed by those adverts, and we're kind of really trying to unbrainwash them through the information that we're trying to spread.
Yeah,
Um, but kind of yeah. I mean, going back to talk about kind of what happened in the 70s. That was the thing. We kind of carried on the tradition that had existed prior to the 70s, before the concept of even animal rights kind of came into being, where we sort of carried on the tradition of the campaigning organisations, but kind of did the same campaigns, but did those campaigns in maybe a more militant way and a more grassroots way.
yeah.
But but people didn't campaign for people didn't campaign for veganism, and this is why this idea that some people seem to be saying that like vegan campaigning and vegan outreach has been going on for decades and decades and decades, and because it hasn't achieved very much.
Just a common lie, that is.
It's just completely untrue. It's just completely untrue, and we are the best people to know because I was around right at the start of the animal rights movement, and Roger was around not very long afterwards, and we've been through all that time. We know what the situation was, and
Yeah.
vegan outreach is only a really recent thing in the history of the animal rights movement. It's really kind of quite it's really quite recent.
It's a 21st century phenomenon.
it kind of pretty well is pretty much. It didn't get, it's kind of, yeah, it existed a little bit before the 21st century, but kind of not really, no. And
Yeah,
even now,
but not in a way that we'd recognise it now. I mean, if you were to transport a modern day vegan back to the 1990s, they wouldn't recognise the movement, would they?
there wasn't really street outreach. You had vegan fairs, and vegan fairs started in the mid to late 1990s, and were the first kind of sort of what you might call big form of outreach, really. But like your street outreach is came really came quite a lot later than that. And even now, it's only a tiny fraction. Vegan outreach is only a tiny fraction of what its potential could be if we could get more vegans involved in it.
It irritates me quite a lot, when you get people claiming that vegan education has failed, because first of all, it's only just started, and secondly, it's never happened in the way that you suggest it, Ronnie, which is kind of everywhere and all the time. It's never been that. So to suggest that something has failed before it's kind of started is a bit off.
Well, I think
to be perfectly honest, regardless of the subject, to ever suggest that education has failed, therefore let's scrap it, is paradoxical anyway. If anything, it's a resurgence of it. If the education for some reason isn't working, you improve it, you better it, you make sure that it does work. I mean, the idea of scrapping something as progress seems ridiculous when education is what we need. But even if you gave them this ridiculous benefit of the doubt and said, right, okay, we've had vegan education since 1944, in comparison to, say, reform, that's 100+ years before veganism was even conceived. So if we're going to look at it in a time frame of, well, we've done this for X amount of time, so therefore we should stop doing it. Welfare is definitely the top of that list, and you still want to do that. So I think vegan education's got a little while yet before we can decide that it doesn't work. Because and otherwise you've got to be consistent and say, well, welfare's had 4 times the amount of time, and we're still doing what we're doing. We're oppressing and exploiting more animals now than at any point in history. So welfare's not working, and you're still promoting it. But you want to rule out veganism because education doesn't work. It just seems insane to me.
Or if you're not promoting it, you're talking it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, and it's also the same in terms of like kind of pressure campaigns, because of all those campaigns that existed, prior to the prior to the 1970s and like continued afterwards, they were pressure campaigns. They were campaigns to try and get the government to bring in laws, and it was like write to your MP. A lot of it was write to your MP. There might have been a few protests and demonstrations and stuff, but most of it was to do with, focused on Parliament, focused on like trying to get people who were totally opposed to any concept of animals having rights, trying to get them to somehow, do something of benefit to other animals, and that went on for like decades and decades and decades and decades. And if you take one example, if you take the example of hunting, say fox hunting, for decades and decades and decades, people have been campaigning to get that abolished. For decades and decades and decades, there was a huge percentage of public opinion opposed to fox hunting. There was finally a law brought in with regard to hunting in the it was in the early 2000s, wasn't it? I'm not quite sure the exact. Was it 2002, 2004, something like that? I think it was brought in, and yet they're still hunting. They're still, the law's really weak and it's not enforced. They're still doing it, not much different to they've always done it. So that's what all those decades and decades of like pressure campaigning have actually brought. Really, really kind of pretty much nothing.
Yeah, legislation will only ever achieve so much. Unless you educate the people as to why the legislation's been changed, it will never actually make any difference whatsoever. It's like prohibition. Unless you explain to them and make them understand why you're prohibiting this thing and they agree with you and therefore prohibition's no longer needed because it's just cool, they don't do it. It's a really useless concept that normally causes so much pushback that actually afterwards, when you finally give in, and you will, what you're opposing is actually far worse afterwards than it was before.
Yeah, I think the problem with fox hunting is that you've got, in terms of the public, we've got government in power that doesn't reflect the views of the public, with regard to fox hunting, because I think that's one thing where the majority of the public would say, right, we want it completely banned, we want it cracked down on. That's for the pub. But this is but in that respect, we've got a government that's totally opposed to the views of the public. Well, certainly with regard to fox hunting. I think that in regard to some other areas of the oppression of other animals as well, you've kind of got that situation. And so that's another problem, that even sometimes when you've actually changed the culture, you've got to also, that's not enough. You've got to also kind of change the politics as well. Otherwise, the cultural change doesn't really.
Yeah, imagine tomorrow that there's some new legislation put in place that said the sky's green. That's it. The legislation's there. You can't argue with it. It's put in place, and if you argue with it, you're going to be penalised with money or with an arrest or whatever. That's the legislation that's there. No one's going to agree to this.
No.
But it's been legislated. So that gives it some sort of authority. No, of course not. And that's literally what we're campaigning for. We're campaigning for a piece of paper that no one's going to pay any attention to. Just like, we've got a piece of paper that nobody pays any attention to now.
Well, the reason why the hunters don't pay attention to the Hunting Act is because the Hunting Act, basically, there's so many loopholes in it that allows them to still go about hunting as they always did. And the second reason is because it's not enforced, because the government's got no will or desire to enforce it, or to instruct the police to enforce it. And I believe they've actually instructed the police not to enforce it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so it's kind of not to do with the it's not to do with people, with ordinary people not wanting that. Most ordinary people do want it. It's to do with the fact that the government isn't prepared to enforce it or have it enforced because of their own ideology, and also the law's so weak because of the kind of the ideology of the government we had in power at the time. They weren't it was a fudge really, in terms of in terms of the kind of wording of the law. It was weak, and so it kind of allowed it was so weak it still allowed the hunts to kind of continue very much as they always have done. But I think you'll never get you're not going to get legislation to abolish the oppression and exploitation of other animals where the members of parliament don't believe in that. That's the problem. And
I've got so much money invested in it too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the reasons why there's been historically such a crackdown on campaigners against animal experimentation, because that's all tied up with the pharmaceutical industry, and of course a lot of these members of parliament are they're involved in that. They've got money in that. They've got their mates in that, and so this is why governments have always made such a huge effort to crack down on anti-vivisection campaigners, and to prop up. An example is where they propped up Hunting and Life Sciences when campaigners, almost forced that laboratory to close. The government wasn't going to tolerate that, and so they moved in and propped them up. And so we'll always get that. Well, we've got people in government who are speciesist, and pro the oppression of other animals. You'll always get that. And until we change that, we're never going to get anything very much in terms of legislation at all.
Yeah. Well, the other question I was going to ask, whilst I remember it, was, I mean, I'm guilty of this with an arm recently. Can you remember people from the Vegan Society being asked to speak anywhere at any events or anything? I mean, I didn't even consider them when I was thinking about speakers, and I think that says a lot.
No, I to be quite honest, I can't, and I think the reason is because they're kind of not regarded as a campaigning organisation, and I think that's why they're never thought of as being a group that'll kind of provide speakers. I mean, certainly, people from other groups have spoken at rallies, marches and rallies I've attended in the past, like people from Animal Aid, people from Viva have spoken. Juliette Gallaty speaks quite often at different things,
Yeah.
because they're seen as a more as a group that actually campaigns. The Vegan Society aren't seen as that.
It's interesting because I don't know whether VegFest UK has ever had anybody.
Well, VegFest was one of the ones that I was thinking of, because I know that not every event they would feel. I can't imagine the Vegan Society would feel comfortable speaking at, say, Camp Out, but VegFest I would have thought would be their.
Yeah. What about the Luxembourg Animal Rights Conference?
Yeah. I mean, because obviously, when you think back to like some of the one of Cross, there's two from Donald Watson, there's one from Kathleen Janaway, there's one from Faye Henderson. These are all extracts from speeches they did for the Vegetarian Society's conferences, and I always thought, where are the vegan conferences, or where are the times you're being asked to? And then I've never found one, so that's why I thought I'd ask. Because, I mean, if he was still potentially around, you'd have thought Donald Watson would be a great person to have to come and speak at your event. But it doesn't seem like that ever really happened.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? You could it kind of begs the question: what is the Vegan Society?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, same as there may be different political reasons or whatever, but why wasn't Donald Watson in the Open Door program? I know that he was no longer writing the issue anymore, but he couldn't have featured for 5 seconds.
I don't suppose Donald Watson and Leslie Cross are in the Animal Rights Hall of Fame, whereas all the welfareists are.
Yeah, well.
Going back to the thing that's on the screen then, on my screen, I think we could finish with this because I've got to go soon. But
no, that's fine.
Yeah, so Watson is saying that if the vegan ideal came to pass, as it were, it would represent the greatest peaceful revolution ever known. Now,
yeah, but it was only a diet.
Yeah, and so, I mean, he said this in 1947, so this is only 3 years into the movement, and most of that he was doing it himself and everything, as it were. But it's interesting, is it? Because, just that is a massive position to have, because he's basically saying that we're talking about the kind of emancipation of other animals and the liberation of humans, and a more peaceful world, human beings being less violent and everything. It's kind of like nothing to do with just diet.
No, not at all. I mean, if I had the same sort of mindset as some of these other people, I could take that quote and extrapolate it and turn it around and say, Donald Watson, the radical vegan, forced his approach on Leslie, who just wanted it to be a diet. There's literally no evidence more than that is all I need.
I've never thought of it that way, but that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, like you take that quote and the exploitation of sentient life one from 45, and you put them together and say, actually, it's the other way around. Donald Watson was the radical one, and he forced this on Leslie Cross and made him do this. And yeah, you could easily extrapolate that in if you want to. But it shows his methodology, it shows his thinking. And this is before the supposed takeover, which is funny.
But I think it also goes back to what you said quite a while ago, Andy, which is the fact that there was like a journey going on here. Yeah. And like this is like quite a few years after all the debates within the Vegetarian Messenger, and then it was about 3 years after the vegetarians said no to the vegans, go your own way type of thing. Yeah. And then within 3 years, Watson's here.
Yeah, so what's that? Autumn 47. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's the 15th issue. That's a lot of time already for your thinking to evolve. It's 3 years, every 3 months.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, and then you've got the intersectional thing that they always talked about as well, which obviously, gets some resistance now and everything. But, the idea that veganism was a reduced and slimmed down kind of diet kind of related thing, to me, you just kind of wonder why people want to say that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said, for certain individuals, I know that there's a financial and business incentive, but for everyone else, no idea. It doesn't make any sense, especially when they go to such lengths to sort of say, well, no, that's not the case. Look, I mean,
Yeah.
again, it goes back to the idea of we're not just talking about sometimes someone will say something and it's like a one off. We're talking about something that was emphasized and repeated over and over and over again over years and years and years. And literally every time that they realize something else, they'd kind of add it in. So, like, the idea that it was just this tiny little thing, and there's the idea that it was just about food, or this idea that it was it's just ignorant. There's no other way to describe it. It just really is ignorant, and it's
Yeah,
willingly
well,
ignorant because it's not
yeah.
hard to find.
I mean, given all you've just said, the idea that people would extract single sentences out of these people's writings is kind of a bit outrageous, really,
Yeah,
because
absolutely, absolutely.
I think one of the reasons why some people want it to be a diet, they think if it's a diet, that means loads more people would be able to call themselves vegan because all they'd have to do is adopt, like a vegan-friendly diet.
or if you're
They can
opposed to
be
punching a cow in the face.
for
Yeah, yeah, of
whatever,
course, of
yeah,
course.
for whatever reason, whether it was health or environment or, it could be, because you disagreed with animal agriculture, whatever reason that you adopted that diet, you'd call yourself a vegan. I mean, and so you'd get more vegans that way. But the thing is, that's kind of got, to me, that's irrelevant because, a person can adopt that diet without calling themselves vegan. A person can adopt that diet and, call themselves plant-based, can't they? It's not. I don't think it's going to encourage people to adopt that diet by necessarily, you know, calling them vegans because they've adopted it.
No, and I mean, the thing is, I don't think we pointed it out in this show, but like, look how easy it is to brand something like Weight Watchers or something else that is a diet. Much easier for Donald if he come up with a diet idea. Not only would he have made some money off it, but he's got no real pushback. It's a business idea rather than an ethical decision. Like, it's much easier for him. Whereas actually doing what they did is kind of like standing up against the world, more or less, literally. So
Yeah,
yeah,
Donald Watson's B12 supplements.
yeah, he could have just called it the vegan diet or something along those lines and turned it into a brand and just said, look, we don't use animal products. This is what we sell.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's confusion. I think there are some countries where they use different words for someone who just consumes a vegan friendly diet and someone who's a genuine vegan, that is vegan for ethical reasons.
Yeah.
They have different words for the two things, and I think that that
You
one of
know,
the
it
problems.
does raise that issue, doesn't it,
Yeah.
about vegan versus plant-based, because it
Yes.
kind of sounds divisive, but it's actually pretty useful to make that distinction, I think.
Yes, it is
Yeah,
because
it is, yeah.
it is because and it's kind of, we don't want people calling themselves vegan when they're actually not vegan. If someone just eats a friendly vegan diet but doesn't follow the philosophy of veganism, I don't want them calling themselves a vegan.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
let's just say that they eat a completely plant-based diet, but they don't even know what veganism is.
Yeah,
They've
they
got
can
no
say, well,
access to the internet.
Well,
They don't
what
know
about
any
the
of this
people
stuff.
who suggest that they're 80% vegan?
that's just, well, most people are probably 80% vegan when you look at what's on their plate. You got a bit of meat and the rest of it's vegetables, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
It
if
doesn't
vegan
have to be a
if
diet,
veganism was a diet, but it's not. That's the point,
not a
isn't it?
diet. You can't be. It's like saying I'm 80% anti-racist.
Yeah.
What does that? That makes no sense whatsoever. What does that mean? That, like, kind of, for 5 days a week I'll be anti-racist. The other 2 days
I don't like sexism for 80% of my time.
yeah, it does make sense because
No.
because you can only say that, you can only use terms like 80% vegan if you don't believe that, if you
Yeah,
don't
and
say.
I mean, no, you could argue that though, Ronnie. Like, I mean, you just made a good point with the non-vegans. For the most part, most people don't exploit or oppress anyone themselves. They pay someone else to do it.
They
So
pay someone
unless they
else to
are
do it.
sat
Yeah.
down eating something or wearing something or doing something along those lines, I'd say in 80% of their life they probably are vegan. I mean, when they
Well,
drive their cars and
yeah,
that kind of thing, they'd swerve to avoid, a squirrel, all these kind of things. So
yeah,
actually, a lot of the time, the decision making probably is, if that's how we're going to look at it.
they paid someone to kill an animal, or to or exploit another animal, for a percentage of their food, really, haven't they?
Yeah,
That's probably a kind of a mi- you know a minority percentage of their food, isn't it? And
usually, yeah, or normally.
that's that's what it is. But I think it's just that they kind of don't make the connection with that, do they?
Right.
And that's the thing that they'll swear they'll call themselves an animal lover, won't they? Because I swerved to avoid a hedgehog. I'm an animal lover, and where's my beef sandwich?
Don't
Yeah.
start swearing, Ronnie.
But it's because they don't see those two things as being mutually exclusive, and I can understand why.
But the idea, this concept of paying someone else to kill animals for you, I think is a very strong one, because that is exactly what they're doing. And of course, if you're in a court of law and you pay someone to murder someone for you, you will equally be convicted of murder, as same as the person that actually directly killed the person.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'll equally get life, same as them. It's just you're just as regarded as being just as culpable, and and of course that is the case.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I mean, to the point where we know most people wouldn't do this themselves. That would be the significant change in their life if that was the case. But we know for a fact that if they went into Tesco tomorrow and they walked down the flesh aisle and it was empty, that they'd be on Facebook saying, I can't believe this. There'd be an uproar and there'd be demand for those shelves to be refilled.
Oh yes, of course. Because those people kind of haven't been educated and kind of don't understand.
Yep.
But
so they can't find. I mean, sometimes people will turn around and go, "Wow, it's already happened." So but like there definitely would be if the shelves were empty, they would demand for them to be.
I think if it was. I think if it's like a sudden thing like that, because kind of people haven't been educated, but like if that happened in a more gradual way, then I think people would go with it. Yeah. I think most people go along with stuff. Most people put up with, especially probably more in this country than like in most countries. It's very, very interesting. Isn't it, this thing about raising in the UK they've raised the pension age, the age at which people can claim their pension, and they've raised it really quite considerably.
Yeah.
And no one did anything. And when they raised it in France or suggested raising it in France to nowhere near as much as they raised it over here, there were riots.
Mm-hmm.
There were riots, but people over here, like, I don't know what it could take people over here to riot in any big numbers. Don't know what you'd have to do, but that's just probably
some sort of
poll tax was the last one.
Well, the poll tax was like the last riot, and I kind of. Do you know what I reckon though? I reckon if they tried something like the poll tax again now, I don't think there would be riots.
No, nor do I. There wouldn't be riots, right? Because as sad as this is to admit and concede, the country have successfully kind of brainwashed everybody into thinking that the victims of corruption are the problem, and the government never get the blame for this stuff. The people that come over here on boats get the blame. So if they upped the council tax again, all people would do would be blame those that are unemployed, those that have come into the country from other places, those that are single parents. Those would be the people that get we wouldn't look at the government, because the government couldn't have done any more at the moment than they could to piss people off, and still people blame one another. Like, if you were looking at this from above in how perfectly to demonstrate division, that's what this country is. You've got a government that literally take the piss out of them. I mean, America's probably worse than we are. At least we don't stand in the street waving our Union Jacks. I mean, we're not that far away, but we're not quite as bad as that. But yeah, that's pretty much what this is about. The whole country, for the most part, blame individuals or blame minority groups rather than looking at the government and thinking, you're the problem.
Yeah. But then the government encourages them to do that.
Of course they do, and not just the government, the media. Everybody does it. All these little minority groups. We've talked about this before. They have their focus, and they don't have a scope. So their scope actually excludes all these other minority groups who are also oppressed, when they should actually be looking at this and thinking, who was it that screwed you over? Who was it that screwed you over? Hang on, there's a common denominator here.
But I think the problem is people continually do things against their best interests. I mean, our present government really represents the interests of a really small minority of the population.
Yeah.
But they still get voted in by far more people than that. But people are always doing stuff to harm themselves. If you look at people's like dietary habits, and the number of people that get no exercise, and
Do you not think though? Like I do. I mean, this is how I kind of rationalise it. That people are so subconsciously and subtly controlled over the things like we've just mentioned. They've got no real control over their life. They have to go to work because they have to pay bills. They have to pay their taxes. They have to do these things. It doesn't matter. Even if you're quite successful, you still have to do all of those things. So where they shop, who they eat, what they wear, what they do for entertainment, all these little tiny things, that's the only aspect of their life that they feel that they've got any real control over. And that's why there's such a reluctance to give it up, because it's almost like I've got a threadbare thin shred of freedom for myself and you want to take that away from me.
Yeah. Once again, the answer though is educating people, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
It's the answer to, that's the fundamental answer to all these things. That while people are as they are, we're going to continue to have the governments that we get, aren't we? And so because people are, it's either the people are the voters or the people don't vote. They say, well, I don't see any point in voting for them. They're all the same, so I'm not going to vote for anyone. And the people that tend not to vote.
Well, that's the ideal citizen as far as the government are concerned.
Yeah, because but there's
a lot of truth in that too, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. You see, and I think so that's the thing. So it kind of all comes. Everything comes down to educating people. And the thing is that yes, that isn't going to be easy, and it's right for people to point out how difficult that's going to be. But there is no other alternative. There is no other way. Whether that way succeeds or doesn't succeed, there isn't another way apart from that. There's no other way that we can do it, and so we've got to go for that because that's the only way that we'll ever achieve anything.
Well, guys, I'm going to have to split because now you've started talking about politics and stuff, and that I believe that the animal rights movement is only about other animals and nothing else. So,
so no, even I don't believe that. It's only about food.
Yeah, I was going to say,
you
disagree with what Donald Watson said then.
It's not even about animals.
It's about what people put on Facebook in terms of, look at this vegan food that I just made.
Yes, that's exactly what it's about.
That's what it's about. Okay, people, I've got to go, so I'll catch you later.
I think I have to. Really
no, that's fine. I'm going to shoot as well. It's a nice little concise show then.
On that point, we'd all go. Take care, everyone. Cheers. Bye then.
But yeah, thank you for joining. Roger's already gone, but yeah, thank you for joining us, everyone, and in the chat. And happy birthday, Donald Watson. I'm sorry that you're looking down on this movement, and we're still kind of about half a foot further than we were when you left us.
Yeah, I know. But
hopefully next year we've got something better to report. Hey,
we'll keep trying. Yeah.
Take care. I'll speak to you soon.
Take care. Bye then. Bye.